formed lower legs and calves as sinewy as the muscles of an Arabian steed. Others are open to debate, such as his opinion on serving a cheese course, and simultaneously on the material worth of disfigured cyclopean women. A dinner which ends without cheese is like a beautiful woman with only one eye. Yet he was clearly ahead of his time on other points, being one of the first to extol the benefits of a low-carbohydrate diet, to draw a connection between the consumption of refined carbohydrates and obesity, and to urge parents to forbid coffee to their children with great severity if they do not wish to produce dried-up little monsters, stunted and old before they are 20. All notions that have since become common knowledge. And he was also right in his premonition that what we eat defines us not just physically, but psychologically, socially, symbolically, and spiritually, to a much greater degree, in fact, than he could have known in the 1800s. Modern science, for example, has taught us that it's not just what we eat that defines us, but what our parents ate. Numerous studies suggest that our adult preferences for salt are predicted by our mother's fluid loss during pregnancy. That heightened morning sickness and maternal vomiting, and thus lowered electrolyte levels, trigger an increased yearning for salt in utero that can last into adulthood, prompting a lifetime of overcompensated salt consumption. Similarly, exposure to flavors in our mother's amniotic fluid and breast milk, which take on flavors from her diet, can result in acquired food preferences pre- and postnatally long before we take our first bite of food. Given that the average fetus swallows somewhere between 500 milliliters and a full liter of amniotic fluid daily, the equivalent of about 1.5 to 3 12-ounce soda cans. Researchers have detected flavors in amniotic fluid ranging from garlic to cumin and curry. Meanwhile, breast milk has been shown to absorb an even broader range of flavors ranging from carrot, vanilla, and mint to alcohol, blue cheese, and cigarettes. Note that amniotic fluid is a lot more challenging to collect for obvious reasons, so its diversity is perhaps underreported, meaning that it could taste like cigarettes too. In one study, infants whose mothers consumed carrot juice during pregnancy and lactation showed a greater preference for carrot-flavored cereal. In another, 8 and 9-year-olds whose pregnant mothers had consumed garlic had a greater preference for garlic-seasoned potatoes. And in another, adults who'd been fed vanilla-flavored formula as infants had a greater preference for vanilla-flavored ketchup. Children who are breastfed also tend to eat more fruits and vegetables and be more adventurous eaters than those who were given formula, owing to their exposure to a greater variety of flavors early on. Of course, the notion that breast milk can influence human behavior is nothing new. For thousands of years, long before Brillat-Savarin, it was considered common knowledge that things like personality traits and intellect were passed on through breastfeeding. So mothers who were either unable to produce their own milk or too wealthy to bother would carefully screen their wet nurses for things like breast shape, emotional stability, and manners. An ancient Sanskrit text, for example, instructed that a wet nurse should belong to one's own caste, have healthy skin unmarked by any moles or stains, be free from such vices as gambling, day sleeping, and debauchery, be neither too old, too young, too thin, or too corpulent, and have breasts that are neither too pendulant nor drawn up, and nipples that are neither upturned nor unprominent. The concern regarding too pendulant breasts wasn't so much that they would produce bad milk, but that extremely pendulous, large, and flabby breasts may suffocate the child by covering its mouth and nostrils. The parenthetical here comes from the source. And as recently as 1544, the English Boke of Children cautioned mothers, "Ye must be well advised in taking of a nurse not of ill complexion and of worse manners, but such as shall be sober, honest, and chaste, well-formed, amiable, and cheerful, no drunkard, vicious, nor sluttish, for such corrupteth the nature of the child." Imagine those wanted ads. Meanwhile, it was thought that drinking animal milk made you act like an animal. And it's not just what our parents ate that defines us, but how much they ate. Our parents' diet and caloric intake can affect whether the genes handed down to us are switched on or off, a process called epigenetic inheritance that can impact everything from metabolism and body weight to disease resistance. For example, fruit flies that were fed a high-sugar diet for just 2 days before mating parented offspring with an increased likelihood of developing obesity. while mice that were fed a high-fat diet for 6 weeks before...
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.